Good evening, everybody. Apologies for the slight delay there and getting started. It's very good to have you all here this evening. My name is Louise Atkinson. I'm going to be your chair for this evening's briefing, and it is by the National Education Union on the Schools Bill. So I am National President of the National Education Union at the moment. I'm a teacher in a primary school, which is local authority. I'm also a local councillor in Cumbria, and I am also fortunate enough to be a governor at a fabulous standalone academy, which is secondary school. So I'm particularly interested in the topic this evening, what it means for me, what it means for the schools that I work with, and I'm very excited to hear from our panellists this evening and your thoughts as well on the bill. So the plans for this evening, we've got a couple of speakers, and then we will have some time for some questions and answers and comments from the floor as well, and the aim is to finish for around about 6 o'clock this evening. So the Schools Bill is currently making its way through Parliament. It's having its report stage at the House of Lords, and then we expect it to move over to the Commons sometime in the autumn. It's already faced a lot of opposition in the Lords, with peers seeing it exactly for what it is, a power grab by this government. It is basically taking away control from local authorities, pushing schools into multi-academy trusts and minimising the role of governing bodies. So today, during our briefing on the bill, we're going to focus on what it means for head teachers, for governing bodies and for local authorities. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our first speaker this evening, which I'm very pleased to have along Kevin Courtney, who is Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Hi, Louise. So I've got my audio working, my video's not starting yet, but I think I should start, Louise, and maybe tech team can catch up with the video if possible.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Thanks very much, Kevin. So and apologies that people can't see you, but we'll get you on.
Yeah. Hi, everybody, and hi, Sam, for doing the BSL. Thanks very much for being with us. And afternoon, everybody. 100 people on the call. And we think, given how late in term we are, we were in two minds about whether to try and do this briefing today or not, because it's so late in term, but we thought it was important and we can revisit it again in the new year. And what we think is so vital about this is in the Schools Bill that they are trying to steer through Parliament, they are continuing down this line of saying that all schools have to not just be academies, but also be in maths by the time we get to 2030. Now, important to know that they aren't taking lots of new powers to force schools into that. They are instead hoping to encourage schools down that road, taking some powers at the margins, looking at schools that have had two successive less than good Ofsteds. Even there, they're not saying it would be automatic that a school would join a MAT. So, but still, that's the direction they're pushing in, and they are going to try to encourage local authorities to force schools into being MATs instead of them doing it centrally from government. And they're also going to try and work with some diocesan boards to try and encourage schools, force schools into joining MATs. And the purpose that we've got on this call tonight is to go through why we think that is not a good idea. There, I'm on, hooray. Why we think that's not a good idea and some steps that we could take about it. So first of all, on why it's not a good idea. First of all, they've got no evidence that it's a good idea. What they did was to produce a white paper, which we saw in March, and then the bill that is now going through Parliament. When they produced the white paper, they produced an evidence document, which they claimed showed that schools being in strong maths do well. That was their claim. We in the National Education Union looked at all of the statistics, produced our own report, complained to the Office for Statistics Regulation in the country about the government's report, and the OSR, the Office for Statistics Regulation, wrote to the government, setting out a whole slew of problems with their data. They really they do not have data which suggests that being in a MAT helps schools. In fact, there is lots of data the other way that says that schools that have done badly on an Ofsted grade are more likely to increase their Ofsted grade if they stay in a local authority, and they're more likely to keep a good Ofsted grade if they're in a local authority. So first of all, the government really has no evidence that joining a MAT improves things. So that's our first point. Our second point is that we were once told by Michael Gove that becoming an academy gave you some autonomy. Now, we were always really skeptical about that, because we always knew the autonomy wasn't autonomy for teachers over teaching and learning, but autonomy for somebody else, the governing body, over the pay in your school. But what we can be really clear about now is the least autonomous schools in our education system are those in MATs. The MATs have far more power over the schools in the MAT than local authorities have ever had over schools in the local authority area. And there is some of that autonomy is very bad. It's very bad to have lost that autonomy. The MAT can describe to the nth degree how you teach the lessons, what lesson planning systems you have to have in place, what curriculum offer you have to make. So it's taking autonomy away, we think, from teachers in the schools. Quite often is happening with the MATs. So we point to that there is a loss of autonomy. And then crucially, we point to the fact that a decision to join a MAT is a one-way decision. That once you join a MAT, your school loses its legal existence as an independent entity. And there is no way currently that a school, if it didn't like the MAT it was in, or if the MAT it joined, which it liked at the first start, has gone bad, if you decide that you don't like it, there is no way of revisiting the decision. You cannot leave again. So we say there's no evidence that joining MATs is good for children. It is clear that your school loses lots of autonomy if it joins a MAT, and it's a one-way decision. So we are trying to say to government, why is your white paper looking at this, looking to try and change the status of thousands and thousands of schools which have chosen so far not to become academies, or if they have become academies, chosen not to join MATs? Why is it looking at those thousands of schools and trying to do something to force them into a situation they don't want to be in, rather than dealing with the very real questions we've got coming out of the pandemic about education recovery, about the teacher shortages, about some questions about pupil behaviour that come out of the pandemic? So we think the government is looking in entirely the wrong place. We are seeking to raise all of these questions in Parliament. And another question has developed. And Louise was referring to this at the beginning, a huge power grab that it turns out that the government is trying to do at the same time. So they want to atomize us, to put us all in MATs, take us out of local authorities, remove us from public control of democratic local authorities. But then they want a massive centralization of power where the central government can will take huge powers to intervene in every MAT and in every school in every MAT. And that has been a straw that's broken the camel's back for many. ASCL, the head teachers union, really upset about it. Conservative ministers of state, ex-education secretaries, really upset about it. Labour, ex-secretary of state, really upset about the power grab. So that there are real questions given that we're on our third Secretary of State since last Tuesday, we've got real questions about quite how the bill is going to get through Parliament. But what we want to say to everyone on this call, and we know teachers, support staff, head teachers and governors on this call, we want to say we think it's right to resist schools being forced into something they don't want to go into. So if your school is running well in the situation it's in, maybe you're still a local authority school, and most primary schools are still local authority schools. Some secondary schools are still local authority. Some have made a choice to go and are in a local small MAT, and that's working well for them. We're saying that you shouldn't have to be forced into a bigger MAT. We're saying that local authority schools should not feel that they have to apply to become an academy and join a MAT, which might be a faceless MAT that you can't get out of, that none of those things are necessary. There's no evidence base for them, and we think resisting it is the right thing to do. There is now a realistic chance that the next government, the NEU is not politically affiliated, so we don't tell people who to vote for in a general election. But there is a realistic chance that at the next general election, there can be a change of government and the direction might move away from this madcap academization. So we're certainly saying we think it's right to slow down, to resist, not to be forced into these decisions. So there'll be time for questions about this. But what I want to say is, if you're a teacher or a member of support staff in your school, have a discussion with your colleagues and agree, if they do agree, to write to your head and governors saying, look, we don't want to be rushed into this. We don't want to be rushed into an academization. We don't want to be rushed, if we are in an academy, to joining a bigger MAT. If you're a head teacher, you will be the person who loses most autonomy if your school joins a MAT. And we're saying to you, work with us and don't be conned into doing it. There's nothing to make you do it. And if you're a councillor, or if you're a governor in the same position as a head teacher, your governing bodies lose an awful lot of autonomy if becoming an academy. You don't have to do it. And if you're a local authority councillor, don't be conned by the government. There are the last time round when Nicky Morgan said that all schools had to be academies, there was a resistance by councillors up and down the country, and we're looking for that to happen again, and not to be bought off by this idea that you can set up a local authority MAT, because that isn't what they're saying. That's not true that there's a MAT that the local authority runs. They're trying to con you into requiring your schools to join a MAT that you've set up. But once the schools are in that MAT, it is in no meaningful sense a local authority MAT. You've just left your schools at the mercy of the regional director, the regional schools commissioner. So we're saying, let's slow down. Let's look for changes. Let's expose the fact that these aren't the changes we need in our schools. Let's expose the fact that these schools in MATs are the least autonomous schools that lose that right to make a decision. And let's expose the fact that there's no evidence base suggesting that joining a MAT is better for the children in your schools. So work with us to say no is what we're saying is our purpose on this call. And we'll look for more calls to talk to you about this over time. So I'll stop there and see what, and I know there are other speakers and then the possibility of questions. Thank you all for being on the call. Thank you, Louise, for being here to chair us.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Excellent contribution. And I agree with where you set out slightly. It's quite late in the term for this, but it's a very, very important discussion, and we have to work together to fight what is proposed in this bill here. And, you know, you covered, apologies for my dog there, you covered really clearly, you know, the loss of autonomy when a school enters the MAT. And I hear from colleagues all over the country, simple things that they want to change, I want to discuss with their school leadership, and the school leader hasn't got the autonomy because they're part of a wider MAT to make those changes. So thank you very much, Kevin, and please do hang on for questions and comments afterwards. And I will just reiterate as well, thank you to everybody for joining us this evening, and particularly those that are working in education as well. And thank you to people that put comments in the chat box there. We will be looking over all of those, and they will be feeding into what we're doing going forward as well. But if you do have a particular question you'd like to put to the panel, or a comment you'd like to put to the panel, could you please use the Q&A section there, and that will help us to be able to address those to the panel afterwards. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to our next speaker now. So we have Scarlett Harris, who's going to give us a governor's perspective of what the bill means for schools. Lovely to have you with us this evening, Scarlett. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise. Can you hear me okay? Good, okay. Thank you for having me tonight. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a parent governor at one of those minority of local authority maintained secondary schools that Kevin mentioned. We are in a minority. As a school, we pride ourselves on being an inclusive community school that serves the whole community, all the kids around here. And we've resisted academisation for many years. As Kevin mentioned, this isn't the first time the Tories have tried to push this through, and we have been resisting it for a long time. We're part of a soft federation of local, like-minded, maintained primary and secondary schools. And I think that's relevant as well, I think, in terms of how we're building alliances with other schools and working together to resist this. You probably already know this, but the schools bill is a cause of huge concern to governing bodies like mine, and actually all different types of governing bodies. I think within academies as well, I think there are lots of concerns about what the bill means, but certainly for schools like mine that are currently local authority maintained, there's a lot in there that we're very worried about. I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail, but I'm just going to outline a couple, my top 3 concerns. So first of all, I think Kevin's alluded to this, there is nothing in the bill in its current form that would mean that local authorities or schools would have to consult the governing body or anyone within the community ahead of imposing an academy order. I know the government's going to consult on this aspect of the bill, but I suspect that will be nothing more than a formality. And that's something we're really worried about. And we worry about the types of things that could trigger an order as well. And we're part of this soft federation, and we've already been having those discussions about, you know, even if we're squeaky clean and do brilliantly in our next Ofsted, all it takes is one of the other schools in the soft federation to have a safeguarding issue or to do badly in an Ofsted. And that calls us all into question. There's suddenly a question about whether we get a forced academisation academy order. As a governor, I'm obviously very concerned about what academisation would mean for the governance of our school. You probably all know this already, but when schools move into MATs, they lose their legal identity, and it's the trust board that decides what powers, if any, are delegated to the school and the governing body. In some cases, MATs have abolished their local governing bodies altogether, which means there's no accountability, and schools are completely removed from their communities, stripping them of their voice and the involvement of local parents like me in their children's education. Without this oversight, there is no body for local communities to work with if they've got concerns about a school. So, you know, my school is very much part of the local community and part of the local authority. If we weren't, the only solution the community has is to write directly to the Secretary of State. And I'm not sure how far that will get them, I think particularly at the moment when there's a different one every week or every couple of days. And sadly, I know lots of examples of MATs around my area, secondary and primary schools, that have been really let down by moving into academy chains, and there is no route for them to leave. So they were good community schools that moved into MATs, and it has not worked out for them, and that's it, they're stuck. There's no option to get out anytime soon. I just want to say a couple of words about what we're doing. I mentioned that we're in a soft federation, and I certainly don't have all the answers. I'm not here to tell you what you should be doing, because I know everyone's in very different situations. But we've been really on the front foot about this, and I'm pleased to say our local authority has been on the front foot as well. We had a meeting very early on with the council lead for education and our soft federation, so governors and school leaders, to talk about what the bill meant. We've got an excellent presentation from the local authority on what all of the different options are in front of us, from soft federation to hard federation to different types of academy trust, and what the implications are for finances, for governance, for everything, and had a really good frank discussion about what that meant for us as the schools within the soft federation and what our options are. We've we've been doing fact finding. We've got a little working group set up within the governing body. I've actually got a governing body meeting later on tonight. And we've been doing contingency planning, really thinking through what our options are. As I said, I really don't have all of the answers for you. I second everything that Kevin said, and I really welcome the message that we should be resisting this, because that's certainly where we are at our school and as a governing body. And I guess my message to, I know there are other governors on the call as well as councillors, and my message is quite a simple one. Given the lack of evidence for the government's policy that Kevin's outlined and the doubts about the bill's progress, I would urge anyone not to feel rushed into changing your governance status. I think now is the time to talk, it's the time to think, it's the time to make contingency plans, but it's not the time to make rash decisions. I'm actually going to do a very reckless thing, and I'm going to correct Kevin on a minor point, which is I think the bill doesn't actually call for all schools to be in a MAP by 2030. It calls for all schools to have a plan to be in a MAP by 2030, which is a very pedantic point, and I'm probably wrong, but that's certainly my understanding from the governing body. But it is a difference, because actually we can work towards that, you know, working in the soft federation, thinking about what does a plan look like, what are our contingency plans. That does buy us a bit of time. It's not saying we have to have jumped into being an academy by 2030. We need to have done some groundwork towards that, which I think we can do, and just keep our fingers crossed that it never comes to that. So please do take your time, think it through, sign up to the NEU Governors Network if you're not already part of that. Plan ahead, make sure you've got contingency plans, but don't rush into anything yet. And thank you for having me. I'm very sorry for correcting Kevin. So I might be wrong.
Don't apologise at all, Scarlett. I could see Kevin nodding a lot there, and it's a really, really, really important point for people on the call there. So thank you very much, and thank you for your contribution. Please do hang around for some questions as well. So as I said before in introduction, I am Vice President of the National Education Union, but I am also a local councillor, and I'm a convener for the Councillors Network that Scarlett's just referred to there. So I want to talk a little bit briefly now about what the bill means for local councils. The huge drive for centralisation in the bill, it will severely impact the ability for local authorities to be able to manage and plan for the delivery of education at a local level. Mainly the move to push all schools into MAPs, it will take them out of the control of local authorities. Local councils will have no say not only in the day-to-day running of the schools, but in those decisions around funding and admissions and other services. And Kevin did speak about this, that, you know, in the paper, in the white paper, there was the expectation that it would contain proposals that local authorities could set up and run multi-academy trusts. But the reality is it's just another way of getting skills into what is a completely dysfunctional MAT system. It's not allowing local authorities to run MATs. The actual policy is allowing them to set up or to broker their establishment, and once they're up and running, it'll just be like any other MAT with little or no effective input from the local authority. And I think as a local councillor, it's really important that we remember what is at stake here and what would be lost for schools and local authorities. Schools would be split off from the wider range of services which support children, young people and their families that councils deliver. And, you know, I know working in schools every single day how important those services are to what I do for the children and young people that I serve. And I think coming out of the pandemic, you know, we're still within some of the situations within the pandemic, certainly within school and education, but it really did highlight and demonstrate the importance of these services for children, young people and families working together in a joined up way. Local authorities would also lose control of school finances. The MAT would take decisions on how finances would be allocated between its schools. And at the National Education Union, we completely understand the pressures on local authority skills, but as has already been said, we really are urging people to think about the huge risks involved in this initiative. Academising skills is a one-way road, and there will be no going back. Once your school is in the MAT system, there's no guarantee that you can keep them within the MAT that you helped set up as a local authority. Scarlett's already said, and I will back that up. Really, please, if you are a local councillor and you haven't already signed up to our councillors network, please do, because we're regularly updating important information and briefing on the schools bill on our website, and there's a link there just popped into the chat if you haven't signed up. So I'm going to hand over now. We've got a video message from Robin Bevan, who is a former National Education Union president, and he's also a current head teacher at Southend High School for Boys. Really, sadly, Robin couldn't make it this evening, but he really did think it was an important meeting and he wanted to send a message. So he's going to speak about the impact of the bill on head teachers and the work that he does in his skill. So I'm going to put Robin's video on now. Thank you.
When I heard that the Secretary of State had a new vision, new proposal for education, that every school in England would be part of a multi-academy trust by 2030, that was my reaction, disheartened and dispirited. I'm Robin Bevan, I'm a serving secondary school head teacher in Southend-on-Sea in Essex, and it's a job that I've had, a job that I've enjoyed in a school that I love for 15 years. So why disheartened? Why dispirited? Well, let's answer that to start with a question. If you were Secretary of State for Education today, would your top priority be the upheaval and structural reform associated with the mass conversion of schools into academies within multi-academy trust? Is that really what you would put at the top of your list? It wouldn't be at the top of mine. We might start with the fact that we don't have enough teachers, especially secondary school specialist teachers, to fill all the vacancies that we have in our schools. That means all across the country, there are children learning subjects being taught by people who are not trained to teach that subject. There are vacancies filled with temporary supply staff. We have difficulties recruiting support staff because the wages are so low compared with the demands of the local economy. You might look at school buildings and see the state that so many of them are in. You might raise questions about examinations and the need for radical assessment reform. You might look at Ofsted, or you might actually simply say, for goodness sake, what have we done in this country where our schools are dealing with crushing levels of poverty in family after family? So that's why I'm disheartened, because the Secretary of State clearly hasn't got his eye on the ball in terms of what those priorities should be. But dispirited too, because for me, a school is a community that's led by a head teacher who is rooted in that community, who has ultimate responsibility for the well-being and provision of both staff and for pupils within that school, and does that with the support, guidance, and occasionally firm reminders from a governing board that is committed to that institution. All of that goes on entry into a multi-academy trust. The attractiveness of headship disappears into a kind of franchise-based model of localized delivery in units of provision. The governing board no longer has ownership of the school, quite literally, but also figuratively, in that whilst there may be a local governing board, it is entirely subservient to the remote central office of the Multi-Academy Trust. It's a one-way ticket too. Let me explain that more. There are examples in this country of schools that have been turned around where a multi-academy trust has taken them over. And all credit to the people involved. There are also very many examples of schools that have been turned around through intervention from local authorities, or simply through working closely, collaboratively with schools that don't share a governance structure with them, but are just there to support others within their local community. The key difference with a MAT is that once you're in, there's no way out. It's a very odd form of school improvement, if we're honest. It's a form of school improvement in which the support is provided and the mechanisms are there to assist that turnaround, but never with the intention of releasing that school back out to be an individual institution flourishing on its own. It's also a model that doesn't have much evidence. There are examples, as I've said, where MATs have done a good job. But this is what we know from the research. MATs spend more money on back office services than other forms of school provision. MATs spend more money on senior executive positions and school leadership than other forms of provision. They are no more efficient and they are no more effective. So it becomes a very odd proposal. If you were to lay out your vision for education, you probably would at some point want there to be some coherence in the way that schools are organised, and you'd probably want at some point to have a system that's a little less fragmented than we currently have. But it's not top priority. The MAT solution is a backward step, not a forward one. And it's worth bearing in mind quite how diverse our education landscape has been ever since 1944, and how that has never really been a barrier to excellence. Funding, staffing, and a commitment to the children in our communities are the three most important things that matter. Thank you.
And thank you to Robin for that message. So we've now got about 15 or 20 minutes for some questions or comments for the panel. I have already got some in the Q&A, but if you wish to add any others in there, please do so. So I'm going to start with a question which I'm going to go to Kevin first, if that's okay. And it's around, I'll read the question in full. It's quite a long question, but I will read it in full, and it's from an anonymous attendee. And it says, I am the head of a Catholic primary school in the Archdiocese of Birmingham. All schools are being coerced into becoming academies as part of a MAC. We joined our MAC in September. The governing body were unanimously against the transition, but the subtext was that if the foundation governors did not do what the Archbishop had requested, then they would have been removed and replaced with foundation governors that would have been compliant. While our experience of this MAC has been, for the most part, positive, it is not a path that I or the governing body would have chosen. Is there any support for Catholic schools to avoid this route if they genuinely feel that this is not the route for them? Particularly polar differences between some of the ways that MATs and MACs are managed. There are some real horror stories out there, and I would back that up as well. I have heard some, and I'll just link that to a question Judith had put in as well, where Judith Addison mentions many schools in Lancashire, particularly primary church schools, so they're under the control of both Lancashire County Council and as the Education Authority, and also the relevant diocese. Where do the dioceses fit in with these proposals? So I'll go to you first, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise, and a very good question about the attitude of some Catholic dioceses. Actually, one of the Anglican dioceses, we've also starting to have these questions in. And we are, it is possible to resist this direction. And we've recently been involved, we're from the National Education Union, but I've recently been at a meeting of heads and governors and members of the union, but of other unions as well in the Brentwood Diocese and in the Hallam Diocese. And those meetings that we've had have been joint meetings between the NEU, NAHT, and in some cases the National Governance Association and ASCL as well. And all of us have had the position, the unions have got slightly different positions to one another because the NEU is generally against the move to academisation, but the NAHT will support it if a head teacher wants to do it, but is very strongly against it if it's being forced on the school. And so there's a lot we can agree about. And what we're saying to schools in the position that we've just been discussing in the Birmingham Diocese, and we're about to do more work in the Birmingham Diocese, is the Archbishop cannot require a governing body to vote to become an academy. And the only decision maker in these diocesan, in these situations is the governing body. The governing body is the decision maker. The diocese cannot apply for the school to become an academy. It can't behave as though the school is just about to become an academy. The Hallam diocese was going far too far in that direction, and we challenged them in court and we won, and the Hallam diocese has had to back off some directions they were making. But we can also say with absolute certainty that the governing body is the only body that can make the decision about moving to an academy. And when they make that decision, they cannot, in legal terms, say, we are making this decision because the Archbishop has told us to. The school governors have to believe when they are voting for it, that they are voting for the right thing for their school. The reason somebody else has told me to is not a good enough legal reason for them to make the decision. So we would say to head teachers, to governors in all of these dioceses, come to us, come to NHT. We'll work to have joint meetings. We are currently seeking meetings between general secretaries of all of these unions and the diocesan boards to sort these questions out, because they cannot require it of you, and they shouldn't be requiring of you for all the reasons we've been talking about. There's no evidence that it's a good thing. There's no way out if your MAC turns out to be not a good MAC. So for all those reasons, you should not be forced into it. So do come to us and we can succeed. We have succeeded in Brentwood, we've succeeded in Hallam, we've succeeded in the Westminster Anglican Diocese in stopping this move in this direction.
Thanks very much, Kevin. It is really about working together as well, isn't it? It's, you know, it is about that communication and us working together to try and stop some of these forced academisations. Unfortunately, Scarlett has had to leave us, I imagine, to go to the governing body meeting that she mentioned. So questions are to Kevin for this evening. So I've got a question from Eddie Adam. Thank you for your question, Eddie. And it's directly to Kevin, in fact. You said that central government are on a power grab to take control. Eddie's asking to control what, especially when MATs have total autonomy. So would you mind expanding on that point slightly, Kevin? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So it helps to have the questions to clarify these things. Yeah, we sort of were thinking at one stage about multi-academy trusts as just the free market gone wild and they could do whatever they want. The government has realized that they have to have more regulation than that. But there is a real danger of them, that what they want to do is deregulate some things and centralize other things. So they intend to deregulate teacher and support staff pay if they can get away with it. All pressures will be down on pay. They'll call that efficiency. We're going to see deregulated chief executive pay, but all the pressures there will be up. They'll say reward success. But there's all sorts of places where the government wants to centralize its control over curriculum, over pedagogy, over assessment. And they had clause 1 of the schools bill was taking to central government the right to inquire and to make decisions for every MAT about those questions. Now, this would be really peculiar. In our country, there has never been Westminster control of schools. There was local authority, not control of schools, but there was local authorities that existed and schools and families around them. But they are trying to get to a position where their regional directors, the Regional Schools Commission, are going to be rebanded regional directors responsible for a whole huge geographical region with thousands of schools in them, and they would be able to make decisions about the MATs. We are very worried about that. That won't be local democratic control. These will be emissaries from Westminster making decisions to you, not with you. And so we have the worst of two sets. We have the worst of deregulation, which is what will happen when your school joins a MAT, and centralization by an unaccountable regional director. I hope that gets to some of what Eddie was asking about. And it's that combination that is causing real disquiet for ex-Conservative secretaries of state about this bill at the moment, as well as the concerns that we've got.
Thanks very much, Kevin. So I'm going to ask you, how do you think that a relationship should be constructed between local authorities, governing bodies and MATs? And what do you think what kind of lines of accountability do you think should be in place?
Well, I mean, I guess this is partly, I mean, Robin was hinting at something in what he just said, that at some point, there was a coherence of schools in local authorities before. Local authorities were by no means perfect. And now people will point to the fact that we've got local authority schools and MATs and single standalone academies, and they say this is lacking in coherence. Now, we are starting to see some models being developed. If you go to Nottingham and look at the Nottingham Schools Group, which is a coalition of schools that are many of them local authority, some of them in small MATs, and they are working together, and they are working in a democratic way, and they're working with a very good relationship with the council and with the local authority. And we think there are models like that. What we say to people who say, how do you get to coherence, is we think that you should now say that schools can leave a MAT if they don't want to be in the MAT. That they could, I mean, you can't do that day by day, but a school governing body could take a decision based on looking at it every other year, say, consult with parents, consult with staff at the school. Is this multi-academy trust working for us? If not, we'll leave it. We'll find another multi-academy trust that we like, or we'll return to the local authority, where there are many thousands of schools still in the local authorities and still finding that works for them. That would be a way of getting to a bit more coherence and a bit more cooperation between schools, instead of this top-down direction that we're currently getting from MATs at the moment. And can I just give one example, Louise, when some of these things became clearer to me? We had a strike. We don't like strikes. We had a strike of our members at the Tendring Technology College, which is in Essex, on the coast in Essex, which was an academy that was part of the AET group. And I went down to visit people on the picket line at that school. That was the most popular picket line I've ever been to. The school, there were parents on the picket line. A local Conservative district councillor came down and stood next to me on the picket line, supporting the people there that we had on strike. And that strike happened because the Multi-Academy Trust, AET, was taking more than £1 million from the budget of Tendring Technology College to run projects that AET had at its central headquarters. I mean, it was still stuff that was going to be out in schools, but they were taking stuff from Tendring Technology College, which meant Tendring Technology College would have to sack people, remove heads of department, remove pastoral care, and our members there really didn't like it. The head teacher had left because of the way AET was behaving. The parents were supporting us. But the weird thing was, you're there with these people, you know the head is supportive, you know the local Conservative councillors are supportive, you know the parents are supportive, you know we've had a fantastic strike ballot, so our members are solid about it, and yet there is nothing you can do. Because when you're in a multi-academy trust that's doing things to you don't like, your school has got no democratic voice inside the multi-academy trust to make changes, and it's got no choice to leave the multi-academy trust. So these things about multi-academy trust going wrong, they are happening. Look at the Wakefield City Academy group, where the trust there took, I'll say stealing, they can sue me. I'll say stealing. Parents in one of the schools in the Wakefield City Academy Trust had collected money to buy computer equipment at their school. It was in a school bank account, and the Wakefield City Academy Trust took that money to pay a centralized deficit. Those parents have never seen that money since then. I call that stealing. And multi-academy trusts can behave in those ways, and we need rights for schools to stop that happening. And we need schools to be in a family of schools where they're cooperating, including cooperating with the local authority to look after children, to look after teacher training. And there's so many things that should be run at a local authority level, and we should be cooperating together in those situations.
Absolutely agree. Thank you very much, Kevin. So I've got a question from Andrew Strickland, and it is around funding for local authorities. So his comment says, our head teacher has explained that local authorities are losing funds, and that means that children are being affected. Joining a MAT, in her opinion, would improve this. And Andrew goes on to say, we've been told that a local authority will be able to force us into MATs if we don't convert, because it will get to the stage that the local authority will not be able to support the few schools that are remaining that have not been academised. What are your thoughts and comments on that, Kevin?
Thank you for asking the question, Andrew. I think that those arguments are not strong arguments, and it may be that your head teacher is misunderstanding some of them. So on the question of funding, well, you know, we think there should be more money in schools and more money in local authorities. There are questions of funding, but listen to what Robin said. Robin is very experienced in these matters and has looked into these things very carefully. Multi-academy trusts are taking more from schools than single academy trusts that join multi-academy trusts find themselves losing lots of resource to the centre. So there's absolutely no sense in which joining a multi-academy trust saves your school financially. So I would ask for real evidence that anything that your head saying different to that is true, because I'm saying to you it won't be true. The second question of, will we be forced at some point? And so sometimes people say, oh, we'll be forced at some point, we should go now when we can make the decision. I want to tell you what the scale of the problem the government has of getting schools to move in this direction. Why did Nadim Zahawi, it was him, last Tuesday, three secretaries of state ago, was piloting this paper through? Why did he say schools in a MAT by 2030, or actually, as Scarlett corrects me, schools to have a plan to be in a MAT by 2030? That's a long way off. The reason he said it was so far off is they know they can't do this quickly. We've asked them what they mean by a strong MAT, because they don't say you can just join a MAT. They say you have to be in a strong MAT. And when you listen to how they talk about that, they think strong MATs, one of the characteristics is big MATs. And certainly bigger than 10. We hear some secretaries, some civil servants saying as big as 50. AET, Harris, United Learning, ARC, they're all 50 or bigger. And quite often you think that's what the government means. There are 11,000 schools which have so far chosen not to become an academy. And we've had this academisation process since 2010, and there are 11,000 schools which have not become an academy. There are 1,400 single academy schools that have not joined a MAT. There are 4,000 schools which are in small MATs, less than 10. And there's another 4,000 schools which are in MATs that are 10 and 20 and 30. So there's a huge task that they have of getting all schools into these big MATs that they want. And I think that they are in real trouble with that project, especially because there is now the hint that the next election might see a change of government. And I think that can give everybody a way of saying, look, let's slow down here. Let's not rush into this. And the local authorities, we think, will by and large not force schools into MATs. It's a way off, it's years off. And I think we're not going to get to that place. Just go back and remember that Nikki Morgan, in her paper, if you remember, she had a white paper and a schools bill called Education Excellence Everywhere. And she said in that all schools would be academies by 2022. Well, we're in 2022. We're more than halfway through 2022, and not all schools. There are still thousands of schools that aren't academies. So it's not working for them because they've got no evidence that it's a good thing, and because head teachers are resisting this direction, and governors are resisting this direction. And I'm saying that teachers and support staff should resist it and should say to their head, you don't need to do this. We don't need to rush it. Let's not go with, just because the government says they've got a bill, let's not start saying we're going to go do it just because of that bill. It hasn't even got through Parliament yet. And who knows where we'll be in 6 or 7 months' time. People are starting to talk about elections next year. Elections the year year after. And with a real possibility of a change of government at that stage, there's certainly no reason to rush into this.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So I'm going to finish now with one final question to you. What issues do you think that have possibly been ignored by the bill?
There are so many issues that are being ignored by the bill. And if you start with the children that we teach, I mean, I don't know how many of you on the call are secondary, how many of you are primary, how many of you are governors and not teachers. But, you know, I talk to teachers all the time, and teachers talking about the poor young people in year 10 who had the 2 years of the pandemic. And, you know, we did the right things during the pandemic, but it's not good that children were at home as long as they were. I mean, we're proud of what the union did, but the pandemic led to terrible situations. And the children who were in the year 10 and 11 then are the ones who got attention because they were getting ready for GCSE. So other children have missed out on so much. And there are so many behavioural questions coming up for those children, and similarly in primary school. And we really need to be working on education recovery. And if I was Secretary of State, that is a thing that I would be focused on. I would also be focused now, and it pains me to say this, but on the poverty that children are facing, the hunger that a lot of children in our schools are facing. And I'd be bringing forward a bill saying universal free school meals, at least in primary schools. But if I was Secretary of State for Education, I'd also be looking at the fact that in many schools, we are being told that we are losing support staff to jobs in Aldi and Lidl that are paying better than school support staff jobs. I'd be looking at the fact that teacher recruitment and retention is so dreadful. 1 in 8 young people who have got a degree, who've then have committed to be a teacher, who quite often got a postgraduate qualification, 1 in 8 of them leaving our profession in the first year, 2 in 8 of them leaving our profession in the first 3 years, 1/3 of them leaving in the first 5 years. If that's not a crisis, and we know now it's leading to, in many schools, many children facing a succession of different teachers during the course of the year, certainly to not having a teacher qualified in the subject that they're teaching. That's what the Secretary of State should be focused on. And that's both focusing on the question of pay, but also crucially focusing on the question of workload. Those questions need to be addressed, as well as getting to a better curriculum offer for our young people, and a more sane way of assessing our children and our schools than we currently have. Those are the issues that we should be looking at, and this schools bill just ignores all of those for this rush to a change of status that has no evidence for it, that'll cost a lot of money and be very divisive in many schools. So it'll take away from a focus on education. And I see people putting many other points in the chat, SEND, careers guidance, all these issues that we should be looking at in our schools, that the Secretary of State for Education should be helping us to look at.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kevin. I mean, they are all of the issues that I'm experiencing every single day in school. And it may be that end of termitis, it may just be the time of evening, but as you're saying things there, I'm getting really emotional because I'm really quite angry and quite cross. That's what our government should be focusing on, not the organisation and structure and this power grab around skills. So thank you very, very much, Kevin, for this evening. Brilliant answers to all of those questions and your contributions. I want to thank everybody who has attended this evening as well. We hope that you found this useful. And as we said earlier, there will be more of these Zooms coming up as well. We really hope that you're going to continue to work with us to campaign and to protect choice and voice for our skills as well. And I do have a very brief ask before everybody leaves the call as well. We've published an open letter to the new Secretary of State for Education today. There is a link there in the chat for it. We're asking people to sign it to show how unpopular the bill is in its current state. So please pick up that link from the chat and please sign that letter just to put your voice to that letter there as well. And I will just finish by saying thank you ever so much to our tech team behind the scenes as well, who have worked really hard, and a huge thank you to Sam Riddle, our British Sign Language interpreter as well. Thank you all for this evening. Good night.
Good night, everybody. We will get a replay of this for people to share with others, but thank you very much for being here tonight.